football season is now in session across America, and I think the millions of people glued to their screens every weekend would be quick to affirm the quote in The Senior that there's no such thing as just football. Sports, they're all about the human drama, and nothing says drama quite like an athlete who defies all odds to do something that has never been done before. Based on an incredible true story, is Angel Studios' new sports film, The Senior, a feel-good and inspirational sports drama, or is it just another conventional paint-by-number sports film? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So I will be honest, I'm not a huge football guy. I follow it as a casual fan, and one of my sons just started playing for his school team, but it definitely sits further down the pecking order of my favorite sports. That being said, I don't think you need to be a big football obsessed super fan to appreciate a good sports story, and I think that this is a good sports story. Earnest and heartfelt, The Senior is an enjoyable sports film that never loses the heart of its inspirational human story, even as it does follow a mostly conventional genre template. And like I said, this is based on a remarkable true story of Mike Flint, who was a 59-year-old former lineman who returns to finish his senior year of college and play out his final year of football after having been kicked out due to his uncontrollable temper. In fact, the real life Mike Flint actually provides a short introduction to the film, which I think lends some weight and credibility to the story, although this is also a Hollywood drama, not a documentary. So I think, as expected, there are several creative liberties taken. Now, as a whole, sports films often follow a very familiar template, and that is definitely true here as well. Despite its somewhat shocking and unusual source material, The Senior's playbook is very short on surprises, with all of its plot developments easy to see coming 100 yards away. Again, that's not necessarily a problem, at least to me, because I think a lot of audiences don't primarily watch sports films for the shocking plot twists, but rather for the feel-good vibes. And The Senior has got feel-good vibes aplenty. In fact, if I were to have read a beat-by-beat description of the plot ahead of time, I'm not really sure that it would have impacted my enjoyment very much, since I think sort of the true cinematic power comes in actually experiencing those moments play out. I think we all know that the protagonist will defy the odds by the end, but it still just feels really good to watch him do it. And The Senior itself is kind of amusingly self-aware that it is, in fact, a football movie. At one point, a teammate remarks that Flint is like a 59-year-old Rudy, which is a clear reference to the kind of classic 1993 underdog football film starring Sean Astin. And then later, Flint and a teammate debate the best football movies, referring to different versions of The Longest Yard, which I thought was a clever way to sort of showcase the generational divide. And I don't think The Senior itself is likely to find itself included in, future discussions of all-time great football films by any means, but I do think that kind of much like its very plucky and resilient protagonist, it does manage to do just enough to energize the crowd. And in his pre-movie welcome, the real Mike Flint remarks, "Today I hold love, God, and family dearest, and you're about to see a movie about all three." And I think, interestingly, kind of noticeably absent from that list is football. And in one sense, despite all the conventional hallmarks of the genre, The Senior is not really about football at all. In fact, Flint doesn't actually appear on the football field in game action until around an hour and 15 minutes into the runtime. Rather, I think The Senior is more about just the inspirational and redemptive journey of a man who just happens to also be a football player. And what sets that journey apart from other sports films is obviously the age of the protagonist, because sports are increasingly becoming a young man's game, and thus most sports movies tend to focus on very young heroes, kind of the Dennis Quaid led Disney baseball film The Rookie is the only one that comes to mind that took a similarly sort of unorthodox approach, although even he was a very spry 35 years old at the time of his debut. So while Hollywood continues to cherish perpetual youth, where even older dudes like 63-year-old Tom Cruise still act and look youthful, there is something, at least to me, undeniably refreshing about a story told from the perspective of an older and more experienced hero. And there's one scene where he's speaking to his younger football teammates, where Flint remarks, "We're not defined by our success, we're defined by our regrets, and I've had a ton of them." And I think Flint's story works as well as it does, largely because of the performance of actor Michael Chiklis, who is perhaps best known for playing The Thing in 2005's Fantastic Four. And Chiklis is fantastic here as well. I think balancing sort of his character's like hot-headed enthusiasm and just raw vulnerability in a way that makes him very easy to root for, like, despite his flaws. I also just like that his character growth is not a straight line, with his sort of like come to Jesus moment followed by arguably his worst outburst towards his wife. And I think Chiklis just really captures like the raw humanity of the character, and the film demonstrates, I think, commendable restraint to not like round the sharper edges of his journey. Probably one of my favorite lines of dialogue is when one of his young teammates says, "Well, at least you're an old timer who don't know all the answers." Cinematically, there's really nothing flashy about the senior. In fact, like, most of the action seems to occur with like dim lighting that attempts to conceal the more like limited scope or like modest budget. And I think like filming sports action has always been just notoriously tricky. And like the on-field like football scenes here are mostly uninventive and like not all that original. I think for better or worse, the senior is all about the story, with like the cinematography merely serving to provide like a vehicle to tell that story. It may not be the most like impressive cinema, but I think its heartfelt story about redemption and like second chances doesn't need much cinematic flourish in order to shine. In fact, I think in a way, sort of the simplicity of the filming lends itself like a degree of intimacy and like authenticity that may have otherwise been like lost amid the noise of the more like bombastic Hollywoodized spectacle. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, really not a whole lot. For language, I only caught two kind of minor profanities, both beginning with the letter A. For violence, beyond just sort of, football tackles and on-field violence, the only other thing is there is a stern father who is shown sort of forcefully teaching his child to box in order to like man him up, and he threatens to give him a whooping if he doesn't do as he says. And for sexuality, nothing here either, other than a few sort of like teasing jokes from Mike Flint, such as when he jokes to his wife about getting a hot roommate when he returns to college. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, I think the senior is just all about redemption and like second chances, because Flint's sort of historic comeback is not merely about like a second chance at football, but just a second chance at life, like at being a better man, a better husband, a better father. And in many ways, sort of the football field is just an extension of the challenges of his home life. And in like one scene, you even have his wife remind him, "We're your team too." I think Mike Flint, he's not like a bad man, but he is one that is burdened by regrets and just carries deep hurts from his very toxic relationship with his own father that now makes it difficult for him to relate to his son. And like the football comeback may be the catalyst to sort of get the redemption story started, but it's really his newfound faith that kind of marks the true turning point. And that moment is most clear when Flint discovers his father's old Bible and finds like a written prayer inside in which his father asks for forgiveness. And later, the film's narrator, who is Mike Flint's son, concludes, maybe it was seeing his father's prayer for forgiveness, or maybe it was realizing that he had become his father. Either way, at 59 years old, it's not every day that you get a second chance at life. And the story itself is left somewhat like open-ended, and even like the faith aspects remain mostly on like the fringe of the story, I think likely to make this it more accessible to broader audiences. But his father's Bible does become sort of the symbol of Flint's own like internal healing, leading him to finally forgive his father and ultimately to forgive himself. And I think in that way, the senior echoes the scripture from 1 Corinthians 5:17, which says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." And I think just reminds audiences that it's never too late for a redemption story. So, in the end, I think The Senior is not a perfect film, but it does have a crucial ingredient that it just seems like so many other Hollywood films seem to lack, and that is a story worth telling. I think Mike Flint's remarkable like real-world journey is just a tale begging for a cinematic treatment, and it has been aptly translated onto the screen, I think with enough sort of crowd-pleasing moments and like human drama to satisfy viewers regardless of whether they love football or not. And some like Christian audiences may wish for a deeper exploration of Flint's faith, but I think its wholesome message just about redemption and second chances make The Senior an easy film to root for. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. If you go check this out, if you're a big football fan, or maybe you're coming in just looking for some good human drama. Either way, don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.